Well, it's 7:01. I think usually throughout the thing here, people usually end up kind of skipping in a little bit and coming in and going out. So we'll have a recording of it. I'm going to pin you there so I can concentrate on that. All right, cool. Well, for those of you that are back again this week, thank you very much. I know we had a lot of views last week with Marty McNeary. How about him and his Forrest Gump beard? That was pretty interesting. What a character that guy is. But here we've got Michael Hennessy. Thank you very much for so this is amazing because Michael is what we talk with people that work in the industry, in the marine industry, is that Michael has a real job. And so for him to take the time this evening to talk to us, like he just kind of mentioned a little bit, they got a big merger, and I'll let Mike explain kind of what he wants and that sort of thing. But thank you very much for taking the time to come talk to us and to get a little background on it. I think you're on mute.
Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay. So usually what we end up doing, I usually start out the conversation a little bit more about you than about your sailing career and kind of where you came from. We'll get into more about the amazing things that you've done in shorthanded sailing, solo sailing, and then kind of get into a little bit of the support and your experience with warrior sailing. Maybe some new announcements about new things you might be doing. And then we'll round it off at the end with some set questions that even Rob Windsor answered. We'll see your answers are probably quite a bit different than his.
That's probably a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, that's good though. You know, we got to have different people on here. So Michael Hennessy, where are you from originally? Born and raised?
I was a Navy baby. I was born at Quonset Point in Rhode Island. My dad was an aviator, naval aviator, and my brother and I were both born on base. Then after my dad came out of the Navy, he went with United Airlines, so we moved out to San Francisco. Lived there for about 9 years or so, which is actually where I learned to sail as a kid. Then United Airlines shut down that domicile at the time, and so we got moved back east and lived in Connecticut and grew up the rest of my teen years in Connecticut.
Okay, cool. And that moved you from there. Were you sailing in college, or was your career mostly as far as sailing goes? Did you I see Mike Hennessy going, always keeping sailing as a hobby, and had this focus on that he really wanted sailing to be a hobby, and your career was like a focus. Is that kind of true?
I sailed before college, mostly lake sailing, smaller boats, Hobies and cats and lasers and that kind of thing. And then when I was in college, I did a lot of rowing, rowed crew instead of sailing. I got out of college and started sailing again in the 90s. I graduated in 89, and then early 90s I started sailing again, mostly kind of lighter cruising through the 90s, and then started racing in 2001. I'd never raced before 2001. Bought my first boat in 1998, CNC 35 Mark III, and then just kind of got into the whole sailing thing then. But yeah, I mean, it's always been in conjunction with my job, and just the job pays for the sailing.
Yeah, so that's one of the things, and one of the reasons why I was adamant about getting you into one of these first couple of clips is because we're showing. My goal in these interviews is to really show the difference in the people involved in sailing, and the network and the opportunities go so far reached. I mean, it's so different in the way people enter the sailing career and enter sailing, and then how we met and how you meet the program and the direction that you can take it. And you are, by all means, a boat owner who races his sailboat. I mean, that's a totally different thing from the first interview with Rob, who works on the boats, who has worked with you, sailed with you, prepared your boats for years, right?
Yep.
So you hired Rob as a boat owner because while Rob is working on your boat sometimes, or all the time, or whenever he would be doing that, you were making money to pay for it.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I would love to be able to work on boats all day long and do nothing but that. I enjoy that kind of thing. I enjoy the satisfaction that comes from having a specific task to get done, and you work the task, and there's no politics involved, and there's, no committee work. It's all, no Zoom calls, no conference calls. You just do the job. You're got the epoxy job or the hardware job, or you're fixing a sail, or you're doing something mechanical or working on the diesel. It's all very straightforward to me and very rewarding. It's just, unfortunately, the kind of sailing I do takes a budget, and that budget can't really be paid for by the sailing alone. So, I got the day job, and that's what keeps me kind of busy. And then, I need the help of folks like Rob to actually get the boat ready to go, so I can swan on and do my racing, and then turn over the keys and get back to making the money that pays for it all.
Yeah, which I think is a great, there's a lot of different ways. One of the themes that I have in my basic training course, and I usually introduce it now on day one, is OPB, other people's boats.
Yeah.
And, and it's a lifestyle, but it's an honest thing. And you, as being someone that pays all those bills, you understand that boat ownership, if you didn't love it, you probably wouldn't want to do it. And I think you've in my experience in the time that I've known you, you have a very specific thing that you like to do in sailing, and there's no one who's going to adjust your focal point on the shorthanded solo class 40s in particular, but just like that side of sailing is something that you're really attracted to. And I think what I end up telling everybody at the camps isn't that I'm not discouraging people from buying their own boats. I'm discouraging people from buying their boats before they know what they really like in sailing. So did you have experience on a lot of other boats? That you obviously grew up sailing on Hobies and that sort of thing. Like, what did you like about your CNC when you first bought it compared to what you're doing now?
Yeah. So, I think the CNC was a more conventional boat. It had bunks. It has an oven. It has a range. It has a head and a shower and wood inside it. And it's actually got creature comforts. You could bring a lady friend and actually have an evening or a weekend of it and be sort of romantic. And that's lovely. The nice thing about sailing is it's a really big tent sport, and if that's your thing, that's available to you. If you maybe you don't want to commit that kind of capital to owning something like that, you could charter something occasionally that might make your budget work a little bit more easily. Or as you say, you can actually have friends who own boats and go sailing on their boat instead, which is a far more economical way to make that happen. And you can do everything from day sailing in a Hobie boat, or you can do weekend cruising, or you could do, you could buy a boat and pack your family on it and go sail for a couple of years, or even more than a couple of years, just from port to port, if you can figure out how to, balance your income with that. Or you can do the racing thing. And even in the racing thing, there's a whole gigantic range of racing that's out there too. You could do it with, if you like just the physics of it, and maybe not the physical side of it, but just the physics of sailing, there's owners that own RC boats, and that's what they do. That's their thing, and that's what they really enjoy. Or small boat dinghy sailing, or medium-sized boat buoy racing, or then you can do the offshore thing. So it's just there's 100 different ways to get involved in this sport, and I've got my particular focus, which came about in a lot of different ways. But the nice thing is there's no one right way to do it. There's dozens of different ways to do it.
Yeah, and I would encourage everybody to go out and try a bunch of different ones. And Mike has been not only supportive of my sailing career when we first met, and has been supportive in class 40s and a bunch of other shorthanded sailing and American sailing in general, but he's also been supportive in providing opportunities for the Warriors on board his class 40 to come get a taste. And that was in Charleston Race Week for the first time last year. And he was signed up this year to to go again, but COVID got in the way of that for providing those opportunities. So it's just awesome that he's always provided those sort of opportunities for a lot of different people. We had a question from the crowd. How did you find Rob?
How can you not find Rob?
That's true. Yeah.
So I don't, I'm sure Rob gave you chapter and verse on his career, but he, after he did the owning the sewage truck business, and after he did the owning the bar business, and after he did the bookie business, he actually went to work for a sailmaker. And he worked for a guy by the name of Mark Wassheim, who happened to be my sailmaker. Mark knew that I was looking for somebody to help with the program, and Rob was looking to do something other than, work for the man. And so he and I kind of connected. I was his first real preparatory gig. We had a good run of it there from like 2010 or so up through about 2015, and really kind of saw him grow into a force to be reckoned with in terms of knowing how to actually help with a program in an effective way. And I was learning the same thing at the same time, right? I had a boat that was much easier to take care of just by myself. And then stepped into the Class 40, which is a much more complicated and much bigger program, and needed the help. And I was trying to figure out how to effectively leverage that help, and he was trying to effectively figure out how to be leveraged, and it really worked out that way.
Yeah, Rob in the right place at the right time.
Yep. Go figure,
both
huh?
you guys. I mean, you guys both. That was a good. I think Dragon, the name of your boat, Dragon. Even to today, and I think you've always proven this, that Dragon can compete after some modifications with the new boats, even though it's one of the original Class 40s. And just to give everybody a little roundabout, you guys can go check this stuff out, but Class 40 is a 40-foot racing sailboat, stripped out racer. It's made for shorthanded sailing, solo or double-handed, so just one or two people on board. And it's a box rule, so all the dimensions have to fit within a box: depth of keel, length. Everything has to fit into the restrictions so that the boats are similar, but inside the box you can modify the design so they're all a little bit different. And as time goes on, people start to stretch to the edges of the box rule to see which edge is going to work out best. And this is a very typical thing for shorthanded sailing. Is kind of has traditionally been a French sport. I think that they all, maybe it's just something in the blood. They just put their kids in the boat and you go by yourself and you'll be fine. And so they just like start these 40-footers and they just start pushing these kids off the dock. But Mike has proven that the original design, one of the original designs really, that he's modified over the years and spent a lot of time and effort making it faster and faster, but she still proves to have some legs against the older boats.
Hey, Rob. Good to see you, man. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Is Rob here?
Signed in. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we sure can.
How's it going?
Pretty good. Hey, Ben, just so you know, you can mute him when he starts talking too much.
Nah.
No.
Listen, we don't have any issues. We don't have any issues with that because he'll hit the button 10 times and be talking and whatever. We've had him on mute for hours.
I just wanted to check in and say hi. That's all. I just wanted to. I got the email and I wanted to just check in and say hey. That's all.
How you doing, man?
It's good. We put the Amhas's mast in today, so get another 3 Class 40s up here with masts in and getting ready to go try to do a little bit of sailing, I guess. We'll see.
I'm pretty fucking jealous, just so you know.
I know. Well, Michael, Joe Harris and Brian Harris both would love for you to come up if you want to anytime and come sailing. So I know it's not Dragon, but if you want to go out and get something in anyway, I'm sure that we could have some fun.
I may very well take you up on that. I'll reach out afterwards.
Yeah. Give me a call tomorrow or later on tonight or whatever, and we can talk about it. I don't want to take away from what Ben's got going on. I just wanted to say hi.
Hey.
I'm gonna mute myself.
Rob, you guys are just proving how the network works. Like, I don't even have to explain how this works now. You just figure out, you get on some sort of Zoom chat, and you guys are going to get to go sailing. And honestly, guys, like, this is how it happens. You figure out a way to go sailing, and somebody invites you and say, hey, this sounds like a good idea. Let's do that.
Yep, that's it.
It's
That's
awesome.
it. I'll let you get back to it, Benjamin. I don't want to keep you out. I'm going to mute myself, okay? All right, bub.
Yeah. It's just awesome. I love how that stuff happens. So that's those kind of chance meetings. I mean, that's really where the network really comes in, and introducing warriors to this is trying to get everybody to understand that this network goes round and round with everybody that you meet, and you just have to put yourself out there. We had Marty McNeary explain that you just got to go do it. I mean, you got to put yourself out there and start asking people for the chance to get out and go sailing. And I've seen you on the dock when people ask, like, oh, all right, let's go. You know, might scare you a little bit, but it gets going. It's pretty cool how that happens. And
it depends. I think it also depends upon what level do you want to get engaged and where you want to get engaged, right?
Yeah.
You know, a class 40 is sort of a unique beast in the sense of it requires some degree of technical skill and ability to handle properly. And it's one thing when you got 2 or 3 or 4 other people on the boat who might know what they're doing, and you're coming along to learn the ropes. But if you raise your hand and you get the opportunity, and you get the chance to go do it, and then you actually then prove, nobody expects anyone to get on the boat and immediately be able to master the boat. It's taken me 10 years arguably to figure out how to sail my boat. You just have to be able to demonstrate that you're able to take care of yourself, and then you're also on a good learning curve, right? That you can actually contribute, and you're going to get better and better and better as time goes on. But I've had people who started out with me on a trial run for a short delivery that have ended up working for me for several years. I've actually just started working more frequently with a woman by the name of Cole Bauer, who I gave a shot to in a couple deliveries, and she's worked out great. So that's the kind of the way it happens, is organically. I'll tell you, there's not a very large universe of people who I think have the necessary combination of skills and aptitude and desire to do this kind of sailing that any of us as owners can afford to not try and build a network. I think we're always trying to make sure we have folks that we're connecting with that want to be engaged with this particular kind of sailing, and see if they're going to work out. And sometimes they work out, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes people try it out and say, yeah, this really isn't for me, and they take a step back. Other times, they're maybe a little bit nervous about trying it, and it actually turns out amazing. Like, they really turn out to have real aptitude about it. I mean, you should have seen Rob. He was like a really shy, quiet guy, and very nervous, very insecure, not a lot of confidence. Yeah. And he's blossomed with the opportunity. It's really been great.
I mean, it's just like now he's just out of his shell. I mean, Rob is just out of his shell. We find that common theme that you hang out with a lot of people who are super shy.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
That gets us in, because that's a perfect segue into what I try and explain in all these things, is that it takes time on the water to get better at sailing. So I think one of the common things that we see in the Warrior program is the first 3 days that people come to basic training, we put 3 people on a J22 with a coach, and the coach is a pretty high spun, very good instructor, very good at what they do and teaching those skills. And I think a lot of the warriors have been very successful in their life at everything that they've done or put their mind to, right? I think that the military teaches people to focus on this job and be really good at it, and they'll teach you that skill. Where sailing, it takes a really long time to get good at it. And even when you're really good at it, sometimes it doesn't work out in your favor. So with saying that, from the time you bought your CNC and you really started to ramp up up to, we'll talk about the Route de Rhum because I see that kind of as Mike's like, woo, like we'll talk a little bit more about that one. But leading up to that, you plan these things out way in advance, more so than a lot of people, and you put as many miles under the boat as you possibly can. So from 2010, let's say, I met you in 2012, I think. What was your kind of yearly goal, time on the water, and how much did you ramp up and improve, you think? Like, how did you get better?
I think I got better in three ways. One is just pure mileage. Just putting in miles that would put me in as many different circumstances and many different situations as possible, so that the next time I saw that situation, I would have some idea of what to do. And I have my biggest year was probably 2018, 2019, where I put somewhere around 7,000 miles in. And I really haven't done much less than about 2,500 miles in any year from 2010 to present. Some years as many as 4,000, some as few as 2,500. This will be as I said, I think before some of you joined, this will be the fewest miles I've done on a boat in almost 20 years, and all thanks to COVID. I might, if I'm really lucky, I might get about 800 miles in this year. And maybe if Joe and others take me out a little bit this summer, and then if I get the boat in the water in November timeframe after the hurricane season winds down. So mileage is the first thing. The second thing is learning from others. It's both for the way I've set up my boat. I am shameless about stealing ideas from other boats. What works and what doesn't work, and how to improve the boat itself in terms of its setup and its rigging and the tools and electronics and equipment that's used, but also in sailing itself, right? Rob would laugh if I said I was a humble guy, but I would like to believe that I'm humble when it comes to things that I don't know, and I can learn a lot from other people, and I think it's knowing how to identify the people who know what they're actually talking about. I mean, there's a lot of posers and wannabes out there, and who talk a good game that really don't have the skills to back it up. But there are also some really great people out there that you can learn from, and you just figure out how to identify them and then make yourself vulnerable, ask them for help. And then the other thing, third thing I was going to say is, in all those miles, don't be afraid to put yourself in harm's way. You never learn as much as you learn when you're sailing under heavy weather, and difficult situations. And so those are the times that you actually get tested, and you actually learn much more quickly in those situations than you might otherwise. So I think those are probably the three best ways I learned how to do this, and it took me years. The sailor I was in 2002 was not the sailor I was when I first got to Class 40, which I launched in 2008 and really got rolling in 2009. And I had put a lot of miles in the CNC 35, and I thought I knew what I was doing, and I had no clue. I really had no clue. And then it probably took until about 2014, 15 before I really felt I had a good skill set underneath me and could compete at a decent international level in the Class 40.
Yes, and I mean, that was about the time, I think, with the Atlantic Cup ramping up, and that's really where we met, was racing against each other in Class 40s during the Atlantic Cup, which goes up the eastern seaboard. And Mike, are you still the president of the U.S. Class 40 Association? Is that still a thing, or is it?
We've never really had a U.S. Class 40 Association. We've just, organized as owners and tried to keep things rolling. Different people kind of put their shoulder to the wheel at different times, depending upon availability and interest. All the U.S. Class 40 owners are really like myself. They're Corinthians. They're folks who have day jobs and other lives, and some people are more active at different points in time. I think we've got 21 or 2 boats in the U.S. in one way, shape, or form right now that are Class 40s, and this is out of a fleet of about 160 at the moment. At any moment in time, probably 5 or 6 or 7 of them might be active in a good year, just because of life circumstances and otherwise. But then there's a international Class 40 association, the thing that runs it all for the world. It's all owner driven. It's the folks who are actually involved in the class. And there's a board there, originally started in France. And, the board is, I think, 9 people total or so. And I've sat on that board since 2011. So I'm actually the vice president of the board at the moment.
Nice. Yeah, because that was one of the things that Tim and I were like the young Americans that Ralphie gave us a vote from the foundation, and we.
Hey Ben, I hate to break it to you. You were a young American. Now you're a middle-aged American. Just so you know.
That's right. Yeah, I can see Rob laughing. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that's true. We were all younger back then, Rob.
Yeah.
I can see him laughing.
Those centerfolds now are a decade younger than you.
Yes, yeah, they are. That's damn. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah, here to help.
At that time, I didn't realize that you had to pay money to be a part of a class association. So thank you very much for covering those costs, because we would have been sailing illegally the majority of the time. But Mike has always been very helpful. Like, oh, where do we get this money? Mike's like, like a kind of, really? But that was
happy to help out.
So from ramping up, so let's get into the route to Rome, because I think everything leads up to that. So tell us, what is the route to Rome and what was your goal there? Like what is it? Because people on here don't necessarily understand what that is. What's the route to Rome?
So I think Ben mentioned it before, that the French are really, really good with this particular style of sailing. And the reality is that the very first long distance offshore shorthanded race was a race called the O-Star, which was a bunch of Brits sitting around a pub one day saying, hey, let's race our boats across to America. And one of them said, sounds good. What are we going to do it for? And they bet a pound, 1 crown, basically a dollar bill on who could get across the ocean first. And they sailed the boats that they had, they owned, they had some real shitters in the mix. And they did well with it. And then shortly after that, there was a race called the Global Ocean Race that was around the world. And it was sort of a group of, I think, 10 or so complete nut jobs who set forth, and again, a bunch of shit-ass boats that you would never want to take around the world. And they could start whenever they wanted to within a certain window, and whoever did it the shortest time was the one who actually won the race. And there's a great book out called A Journey for Madmen that was all about that race and everything about it. And there's some stories from that race that were epic. But one of the stories was this guy called Bernard Motissier, who was like the only French guy in it. And he got himself 3/4 of the way around the world, was doing pretty well, actually, in the sense that his boat was still floating. Most of the boats didn't actually make it all the way around. And he said, you know what? Fuck this. Who wants to win? It's the journey, not the destination. So he turned around and he started back around again. And the French loved it. The French thought it was the best thing ever. They loved the spirit of it, the elan, they just thought that was the best thing ever. And so they've had this love affair with this kind of sailing ever since. And they now dominate it. Like when you look at all the great offshore shorthanded sailors, they're French. They're perfectly good sailors in other kinds of disciplines, but they don't dominate the other disciplines like they dominate this. They get their asses handed to them in the America's Cup. They don't particularly do that well in the Global Ocean Race. They're, okay around the buoys, but, it's the best fin sailor in the world has been a Brit. But when it comes to this kind of racing and these kinds of boats, they are nuts. And they have a few events. One's called the Route de Rome, the other's called the Vendée Globe. The third is called the Transat Jacques Vabre, which are offshore, point-to-point distance racing. The Route de Rome runs every 4 years. It runs from a place called Saint-Malo, France, to Guadeloupe, the island of Guadeloupe in Caribbean. It's single-handed, and that's about a 3,800-mile race, roughly, and it's run every 4 years. The second race they run is called the Transat Jacques Vabre. It's a race that Rob actually did. That race is double-handed. It's run Rob, is it every 2 years or every 4 years? It's every 4 years, right?
It's every
I think?
2 years, I think.
Every 2 years, okay? And that race runs from France to Brazil. And then the third race is the Vendée Globe. And the Vendée Globe goes from Les Sables d'Olonne in France around the world and back to Les Sables d'Olonne. And so those are the three biggest races in the shorthanded calendar. And you can see the picture there that Ben put up. They have a race village. You have to show up 10 days before the race as a boat owner. You have to qualify to be in the race. And there's over 2.5 million people that go through the race village in those 10 days before the race, which is pretty remarkable. I think there was roughly 130 boats in the race my year. And it's 130 people who would much rather be alone. And yet you've got this unbelievable universe of people who show up just to see it. And when you go out to the start, there's 2 points of land that the boats go past. So there's 1 point of land at the start, and then there's another point of land about 15 miles down the course. And there's about 1 million people on shore and on boats on the water watching the start. It's televised. It's like the Super Bowl, but in French. And it's really the most incredible thing ever.
In French.
But it's French. It's a pretty amazing thing. And, if you're a short-handed sailor and like to race, it's pretty much like the Super Bowl. But unlike the Super Bowl, an idiot like me can rock on up and actually compete. So that's what I did.
Well, all right. So, and this is where Mike Hennessy can be humble. Okay. So if you look at these boats that I'm sharing, just a route to Rome, you can watch a bunch of videos, but you have to understand, this is the Super Bowl essentially for the French. So that's 2.5 million people that come to the race village over those 14 days. And this somebody's solo on this boat by themselves, and they race. Obviously, Mike's not on that one. That's next year. He's on. That's not him either. That's not Mike either. But it's so if you look at some of the pictures, and I don't have any specifically, and Mike might have more what he did. So Mike says he rocks up. Okay, so that's like, oh yeah, hey, you want to be quarterback in the Super Bowl, and Mike rocks up. Like, there's like interviews, and this is like a serious big time event. And so get into that a little bit about the interviews and what it was like. I mean, obviously the French are, they were very happy to have you there, but it is like, you're an outsider, right? I mean, being an American in that field, you're an outsider, right?
Yep. I think that's true. There were actually 2 Americans, or 2.5 Americans. It was myself, John, and then a guy from South Africa who now lives in Georgia, all in the class 40. I think I had a little bit of an advantage because I've been involved in the class for so long, and I've been going to France and on the board and with meetings. So I have a pretty deep network and set of relationships in the class. But at the same time, for the 2.5 million people, they don't know you. I mean, you're just that. Oh, look at the American, kind of like a panda in a zoo. And so, but it's. They're incredibly hospitable. They're really nice. They're all very respectful of the journey that you're going to make. They limit the number of people that go down to the docks because they can't have 2.5 million people wandering the docks themselves. So they're all up on the sides of the docks here. But people have connections and can get bracelets to actually get down on the docks. They'll walk the docks, and they've got programs with all the different skippers in them, and the kids come up to you and they want your autograph because they want every skipper's autograph on every photo. And what I did is I printed up a lot of stickers, with Dragon Ocean Racing on it, and like the kind of things that you see slapped up in dirty bars. I hand them out to all
too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd hand them out to kids, along the way so that, they'd have something to take with them. And, there's radio interviews and TV interviews and print interviews, and it's just a mob scene. It's an incredible mob scene.
And so let's get a little bit of the dynamic. So it's not only is it exhausting to get through that, but you had to take time off of work, or are you still working while this mob scene's happening?
I was still working. You know, you know, modern technology being what it is, you can kind of be in touch from wherever you are. And so, you know, I was taking a pretty full meeting schedule and pretty full phone call schedule, but I would just find time. The time zone helped, right? I could be awake in France and engage with the boat until about, you know, noon or 1 o'clock local time. And then I just kind of in the afternoon, I'd disappear to go do some work. And then I'd take a little break. I'd schedule dinner into there in France, and then I'd go back to work until late at night. So, you know, I actually was pretty actively involved for those days with both work and the scene.
Right. So,
but it was a relief to get.
Yeah, I was going to say probably the most relief that you have, which I've found this in a lot of races, is actually when you finally sail. You know, so yeah. Rob's there, right? Rob's preparing your boat, right? And Rob,
in this particular case, Rob was not there for the route to Rome. This was I had a local preparator from the UK who had taken care of the boat once it got over to Europe, okay. And he was with me in the days leading up to the race. Okay,
but so somebody essentially steps off the boat. You're alone on the boat, and you realize you're going to be alone on the boat. Your phone's not going to work, and there's a start. So when does the engagement of like, holy shit, this is happening? You know, I mean, did it even set in, or was it like a day in where you're like, oh, wow, they got a long way to go?
Well, you got 130 boats, and some of them are, you know, 100-foot trimarans buzzing around the starting line. The starting line's like 5 miles long, and you're all in this very deep box. And outside the lines of the course, there's 1,000. And when I say 1,000, I'm not exaggerating. There's like 1,000 fucking boats, maybe more, that are all lined up along the side of the course, and you get going and you go across the line, and then all those boats are like they're following you along the way, and it starts about noon or so, and you know you keep going and you get past the second point of land where all the other people are up on the cliffs watching you pass the second point of land, and then there's some tricky coastal navigation that first night, and that you have to really be on your game for, make sure that you don't end up on the beach. But once you get past about 1 a.m. in the morning, and you get past that first you know, that last point of land that you're in, then that's when it sets in. Then the boats start to space out a little bit. You've got a little less concern about actually hitting another boat. You can actually breathe for the first time, take a piss, and that's when you start realizing, oh yeah, I'm doing this. Which in this particular race, that was also when we started saying, well, then the first little low pressure system's rolling in. And so we're getting ready for that too. But
all right, so I know you have important business meetings, and you probably want to pitch before that business meeting. I want to get into, while we were all in the comfort of our living rooms watching the tracker as it's going, and Mike is alone on his class 40. Okay, so after a week of media BS, and Mike is alone, and I'm watching the tracker going, where is Mike going? He is going to do that, isn't he? He's going to do it. Like, there was a split in the course depending on the weather, and explain those couple nights, because you took the American route.
Yeah. So I started out pretty slow. Like I came across the starting line probably in about 43rd out of 53rd. You know, nerves, didn't want to break anything, kind of want to get sorted, and I actually did a pretty good job of working my way up through that first 24 hours into about 21st place. And, you know, just kind of picking my way through the fleet and working my way, made a decent choice in a couple navigational choices. These low pressure systems started to come in, and one thing we knew was that there was going to be a series of multiple lows, and that's what happens in the fall time. Bad weather in South Carolina ends up taking off across the Gulf Stream, building into something much worse, and then just keeps going across the Atlantic and hammers its way right up the English Channel. And so it's a classic part of this particular race. This year was worse than most. We ended up having 4 low pressure systems sweep over us. What ended up happening is those 53 boats, ultimately, I think like 31 of them finished. There was just carnage on the race course. And after that first day or so, and the first low pressure system kind of went over the top of the fleet, and a lot of people were like, oh, fuck, this is a lot worse than I think it might be. So half the fleet kind of retreated to land and waited it out. They waited it out like a week because they just could not get out of port once they got into port. The rest of the fleet keeps going. And we get into a pretty nasty set of lows that starts breaking boats. Masts start coming down, bulkheads start delaminating. And so the vast majority of the fleet breaks left. And they start going down along the Spanish coast, Portuguese coast, almost to the Canaries before they hook right and go across the trades to Guadeloupe. The other route goes sort of straight over the Azores, which is more of the straight line route. And then the third route usually involves going out across the Atlantic over the top of the Azores and then down into Guadeloupe. So there's 3 different routes. And if you look at routing, which I did, if you look at routing for this race over 20 years time window, it's usually about a third of the time that favors any one of those 3 different combinations of routes. The northern route is always the worst because you're beating your way into lows, and you're literally beating your way into lows for the first third to half of the race before you're able to break off and start reaching down. Upwind. In my particular case, the first 11 days, it didn't drop below 35 knots, and I didn't come off the wind once in those first 11 days. It was just hammering, slamming my way upwind for 11 straight days.
Were you tacking or just on one board?
Oh yeah, I was tacking. Yeah, I was tacking. Which is, when you tack a class 40, it's a pretty elaborate dance and involves moving about 450 pounds of gear from one side of the boat to the other side of the boat, and working your way through a pretty elaborate routine to do that. And usually, it's blown like stink and not very pleasant at all. But I knew that if I just Ben talked about a little before, I've got an older boat. The newer boats have an advantage when they're doing reaching or running. They're faster than me reaching, much faster than me reaching. Deep running, I'm pretty good with them. Light air, I can kick anyone's ass. Upwind, I'm fast or faster than many of them. And the one thing that's sure is I'm tougher than all of them. And so I knew if I turned left and went down to the Canaries that they were going, I was going to have my ass handed to me. Maybe I finished in the mid-20s. But I also knew if I kept on going upwind, I would have a chance to do better than that if the boat could survive and if I could survive. And so I decided to keep going. And that's how I ended up beating upwind for 11 days. And ultimately I finished, I can't even remember, I finished like 11th or 12th place. I got as good as 9th for a little while. And I think I dropped back to like 11th place, I think, at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, but you say that like 11th place. How many amateur sailors, as far as like not having a professional sponsor that doesn't have a day job and they're professionally sailing, how many other amateur sailors were there in the Class 40 fleet?
In the Class 40, half the fleet was amateurs. The next amateur sailor after me finished somewhere in the mid-20s.
Yeah, so you kicked ass.
In my opinion, he might as well have won, in all seriousness. I'm serious. I'm pretty sure you came in 12th, Michael, and I was so proud of you when you got to Guadeloupe. I'm still am to this day. I really feel like that is chalk one up for a win in my book. So
yeah, if I could afford a Rolex, then I'd buy you one, because of all the sailing you've done. Tim and I, he called me, and I talked to Rob quite frequently. So a lot of us solo or shorthanded sailors that have raced against Mike, while he was going, there was like a morning conference call. We were all worried. Of course, we were all like sitting having our cup of coffee while Mike was flying off waves, going upwind, probably still trying to write emails to Morgan Stanley to try and make sure that he could get deals done. Going straight upwind, and when he finished, I mean, you take us back to that moment, because I know you have to get going, but that moment when you crossed the finish line, I think that all the people that you sailed against in the Class 40 over the years were watching live, and all of us had exactly that same feeling. So proud, like, oh my God, somebody did it. Like, what was that moment like when you finished?
It was pretty awesome. It was 21 days. Rob was there. Rob actually flew into Guadeloupe and took care of me on the back end and got the boat sorted, and then ultimately delivered it back to Key West with Mark Wasson, my sailmaker, and Mark's wife/girlfriend. But Rob was there. It was pretty incredible. The last sort of 18 hours of that race, you actually have to go under the bottom of Guadeloupe and under the lee shore. So it's really, the wind dies down to nothing and you're kind of drifting along and fighting your way. It's, they take a brutal race and they make the last 18 hours the worst part of it. And then we got around the corner and, I kind of had a relatively close hauled run into the finish line, and it's pretty overwhelming. I mean, you're doing something that you've kind of planned for a decade and, really put 4 years of your life into, and, it's a pretty overwhelming experience across that finish line.
That's awesome. I mean, that's one of the main reasons, besides the balance between work and everything, was to hear that story. Because, I mean, yeah, it's just like going to the Super Bowl, showing up, and yeah, you might not have won, but you were there the whole time through the fourth quarter and into overtime, and you were still playing, which is amazing. No one can ever take that away from you, Mike, ever. That's like a win. I agree with Rob. Are you going to do it again?
That's one of the toughest parts about doing something that kind of defines your life is, what the hell do you do next? It would be hard to do this race again in that boat, only because keeping that boat up to speed in the class only gets harder by the year, and there's only so much you can actually do to make that happen. So, part of me wants to do it again. I mean, it sure as shit would be fun to do it again, and maybe I'd have better weather. But I don't know that I'd do any better. Like, I don't think I could possibly do better than I did the last time in it. And so I thought about putting another boat into build, and it's just a huge amount of money to do that, and huge amount of time and distraction. And frankly, my job's only gotten more complicated and busy since then. So that was a problem. So, it's hard trying to, figure out what your purpose is after you've climbed your personal Everest.
I would think that some of the Warriors might have the same feeling about some things.
Yeah, I imagine.
So that gets us into the last question. You've kind of gone over a little bit of what advice you can give to anybody about sailing. So that, put yourself out there and getting out there. You've kind of gone over the worst offshore weather story. I think that probably going upwind and 45 knots for 11 days straight solo on a class 40, you just chalk that up. So let's just count that. And if there's something worse than that, you can write us an email about it. Because that sounds like it's awful. But with your experience with Warrior Sailing doing Charleston Race Week in the short period of time that we had you, and you offered the boat and actually raced on Dragon during Charleston Race Week, can you tell us something that you might have learned from the veterans that were on board with you during the time or during your experience with Warrior Sailing? What did you learn from the veterans?
I think the most amazing thing to see is the joy that people get from doing this. Just being out on the water and having the opportunity to experience what it feels like, to the purpose that's there with being able. One of the reasons I do sailing is because it draws on so many skills and requires such a degree of self-reliance. And when people kind of fit that all together and realize that this is something that actually can give that purpose and provide that outlet and draw on those skills of self-reliance that that maybe you've built up through other backgrounds, through your military background or otherwise, that's very rewarding to see that. And I think that was clearly on display when we did Charleston Race Week with guys. I've had the opportunity to have Warriors on the boat a couple times during during the Atlantic Cup on some of the inshore stuff that's been done. And it's always a thrill to be able to introduce people to the sport, and particularly people who are hungry to want to do it. So I think that's the best thing, the best takeaway from it.
I agree. Well, I want to make sure that you have enough time to get to your other call, and I really, really appreciate it. And then when we really get all of our shit together over here at Warrior Sailing, we put together a board of advisors. I think you're one of my first people. So don't let work get you too busy, and don't go offshore for that long, so that we can have you with helping us out, because you've been so helpful over the years. And thank you very much for everything you've done for the program, even before it was a program.
In all my spare time, I'd love to do it. And hopefully Charleston Race Week is a thing next year.
Yeah, you're going to do Pineapple Cup?
I am definitely planning on doing Pineapple Cup. I want to do as much of the SORC racing this winter, just because. I mean, what the hell? I haven't had the chance to be out there. So I think I'm going to launch the boat in November, do some sailing in Charleston, get the rust shaken out, and then try and do some of the shorter SORC races. You know, they're a little bit of a snack, but what the hell? Snacks aren't a bad thing. And then do the Pineapple Cup. Then I'll do Bermuda 1-2 next year. Some of it's driven by like what the program might look like for the mixed double hand offshore stuff that's going on. And depending upon how that plays out with everything else, figure out how the Class 40 fits in with that.
Okay, cool. Well, we're going to try. I know Ralph we've been talking about getting the Class 40 out. The Cutlass that's down there in Port Royal too. So, and if you're sailing from Charleston, there's a snack right there. You can more than welcome. We got dock space down there for you to come down and stay. So you got to come check out that place and sail down.
I definitely want to check out that place.
Cool.
I mean, I don't feel compelled to give my business to, you know, Safe Harbor. So.
Well, I mean, there we are.
Exactly.
But Mike, I really appreciate you taking the time, and yeah, we'll see you on the water the next time. But thank you as always for the support, and good to hear from you. And you take it easy. Don't work too much.
You know, it's been a lot funner talking to you than talking with Australia, and that's up next. So.
All right. Well, if anybody, so Warriors, if you guys do want to write questions, we can take some questions, and I can send them to Mike. He's pretty good at responding. So if you had specific questions, we can take those via email. You can either send them to me or send them to Corey, and I'll make sure we kind of get those answered. But thank you again, Mike, and thank you, Warriors, for all checking in. See you guys.
Great seeing you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.